Do you know how terrible the world's scariest women's prison is? Today's video will definitely challenge your psychological limits. New viewers can like and subscribe to the little bell so as not to miss the great video. I won't talk nonsense. Let's start with the 10th place. 10th Patarei Prison in Tallinn, Estonia. Originally built in the 19th century as a naval fortress for Tsarist Russia, it was transformed into a formidable prison during the Soviet era, which operated until 2005. In ordinary prisons, although freedom is lost, the minimum living conditions and basic human rights can still be guaranteed, but in Patarei Prison, it was a different story entirely. Originally designed to accommodate 7 people, the dormitory was often crammed into more than 30 people. You can imagine it. The small space was densely packed with people. It was difficult for the prisoners to even turn around. The air was so turbid that it was suffocating, and the living environment was extremely bad. What is even more outrageous is that the attitude of prison guards towards prisoners was extremely brutal. They completely regarded themselves as the masters of the high, beating and humiliating the prisoners at will, and trampling the dignity of the prisoners under their feet. Moreover, there was a room of men and women living together, which was undoubtedly worse for female prisoners. Female prisoners not only had to endure harsh living conditions and brutal prison guards, but also had to be constantly on guard against aggression from male prisoners. And they also suffered indelible psychological trauma, living in fear and despair every day. A female prisoner who once served a sentence here recalled that in prison, she was afraid to sleep every day for fear of being violated in her sleep. Once, because she accidentally offended a male prison guard, she was taken to a remote corner where she was severely beaten and bruised. But there was no way to complain. This kind of physical and mental torture had brought countless female prisoners to the brink of mental collapse. What's even more outrageous is that the prison guards here deliberately removed natural light and fed the female prisoners from time to time, so that the female prisoners completely lost their sense of time, and eventually lost themselves and detached themselves from reality in the cold walls. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Patarei prison remained in operation until 2002, when it was abandoned. And today, the prison has been converted into a museum and is open to the public. 9th Khlong Prem Central Prison in Bangkok, Thailand. It was built in 1944 under the official name of Bangkok Central Prison, and it is still in operation today compared to a regular prison. The environment here is a nightmare. Let's start with space and hygiene. In a normal prison, the cells will have a certain space plan and basic sanitary conditions will be ensured so that the prisoners can have a relatively normal living environment. But the Khlong Prem prison is extremely cramped, like a crowded sardine can with an average of 40 to 50 people per cell, but only one toilet is equipped. This has led to poor hygiene, a breeding of bacteria, insects, and rats running rampant in the cells. What's even more terrifying is that this is a mixed prison for men and women. For female prisoners, it undoubtedly pushes them deeper into the abyss. Female prisoners are also required to wear shackles during the first 3 months of their imprisonment, which not only severely restricts their freedom of movement, but also puts them under tremendous psychological stress. Moreover, they only eat a small bowl of vegetables and rice every day, and are often in a state of hunger, and their physical and mental state is deteriorating. Prison guards also routinely conduct random body searches of female prisoners, with no respect for their privacy and a lack of dignity for them. In this prison, there is also a deeply distorted social hierarchy. Female prisoners are at the bottom of the ladder and are forced to provide services to male prisoners, as well as endure insults and bullying by male prisoners. According to a female prisoner who once served her sentence inside, if a female prisoner did not comply, she would be beaten by male prisoners, and prison guards often turned a blind eye to this. This long-term oppression and torture has caused most female prisoners to suffer from serious mental illness and depression and anxiety have almost become the standard for female prisoners here. As for how all this was exposed, it is thanks to one person, an Australian woman who served a 7-year sentence in a Thai prison for A. Crime has written a book about her harrowing experience in Klong Prim prison. In 2000, 29-year-old Holly Dean Johns was arrested and sentenced to 31 years in prison when she tried to send a package of heroin to her family in Perth. When she arrived at the prison, she saw a huge cell filled with more than 100 Thai women sitting on blankets. She asked the others where she could lie down, and the group gave her a floor about 6 inches wide, which was where she had slept for 7 years. There were 2,000 women in the area where she lived, but there were only 10 toilets in the yard. Battles for sleeping places and sanitation facilities were commonplace. 8th Dayman Hour Prison in Egypt. It is no less terrifying than the aforementioned Klong Prim prison. The cells in Dayman Hour Women's Prison were dilapidated, poorly ventilated and poorly lit, with dozens of female inmates crammed together in a small space. There were only a few dilapidated iron beds to rest in, and the sanitary conditions of the communal toilets were disgusting. Here, however, female prisoners were not only tortured by harsh conditions, but also physically and mentally abused. As soon as they entered the prison, the guards made the female prisoners strip naked and change into a translucent white robe, after which they were sent to a room, a 20-square-meter cell packed with about 70 prisoners who could not sit down. The room had only one toilet with a wooden door. There were many holes in the door, with no roof, no privacy. The female prisoners were not allowed to use toilets or showers without the permission of the prison guards. In addition, prison guards often inflicted physical punishment on female prisoners, such as beating them for the slightest mistake, and standing for long periods of time was common. Female prisoners were also called upon to provide services that were difficult to be mentioned. They completely lost their dignity as human beings. Medical facilities were almost non-existent in this prison, where diseases ran rampant. When there was an outbreak of contagion, the whole prison was in a panic. If someone got sick, she could only fend for herself in pain. Some disobedient female prisoners were kept in a single cell measuring only 150 multiplied by 180 centimeters. In the corner of the cell, there was a faucet and a small hole, which was the toilet of the female prisoner. The cafeteria was only open to prisoners twice a month, and sanitary napkins were not allowed. 7th Santa Martha Acatilo Women's Prison. It is a prison in Mexico that is a literal hell on earth. The first thing that catches your eye when you walk into this prison is the dilapidated facilities, with mottled walls and leaky roofs that seem to collapse at any moment. Compared to the neat and orderly environment of an ordinary prison, this place is completely terrible. The cells were so overcrowded that there were a severe shortage of beds, and the prisoners had to take turns sleeping. And they were in a state of sleep deprivation for a long time, and their mental state was extremely sluggish. The behavior of the prison guards was even more outrageous. They showed no mercy to female prisoners and often abused them physically and emotionally. If the female prisoners showed slightest dissatisfaction or resistance, they would be beaten and verbally abused by the prison guards. Their bodies were covered with scars, and their hearts were also greatly traumatized. In addition, the prison guards would take the female prisoners to remote places in the middle of the night to punish them, so that they could spend long nights in fear. In 2016, Amnesty International's director of the Americas said he had interviewed 100 women who had served sentences in the prison. They had been physically, psychologically, or sexually abused by prison guards during arrest or interrogation. Almost 97% of female prisoners said they had been choked and beaten with plastic bags, and 72% of female prisoners said that police had threatened them or their families with rape and assaulted them. In April 2016, a video of a military police officer smothering a female prisoner with a plastic bag was leaked to the public. Mexico's defense minister, Jen Salvador Cienfuegos Zepeda, apologized to the nation for the video, putting an end to the farce. 6th Good Shepherd Prison in Colombia. It is located in a remote and deserted area on the edge of the city, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire, like an island isolated from the outside world, where all despair and pain are imprisoned. Stepping into this prison, the pungent smell hits your nose, and the harsh environment is instantly suffocating. Beyond the design capacity, the Good Shepherd prison was severely overcrowded and had little to no gap between people. Facilities were scarce, the sanitation was terrible, and the yellowing and foul-smelling water was disgusting. Food supplies were also severely inadequate, and prisoners were chronically starving. In such a harsh environment, infectious diseases such as colds, flu, and dysentery were rampant, and the health of prisoners was always threatened, and their lives were as fragile as candles in the wind. And the treatment of female prisoners by prison guards was even more outrageous. They completely ignored the basic human rights of female prisoners and often physically tortured them. Some prison guards spat in the faces of female prisoners for no apparent reason, insulting them and trampling their dignity to the ground. What is even more excessive is that the female prisoners were also forced to perform all kinds of bizarre and humiliating actions, but the prison administration turned a blind eye to this evil and allowed such evil acts to continue to be staged. However, there was a seemingly peculiar phenomenon in this prison. A beauty contest would be held every year. It was held in an empty but dilapidated courtyard in the prison, surrounded by a stage made of rudimentary planks and banners. Before the competition, the female inmates would start preparing long in advance, making their own costumes out of discarded items and helping each other with their makeup. On the day of the competition, the female prisoners, dressed in their own elaborate dresses, walked onto the stage one by one. In addition to the other female prisoners, there were also prison guards in the audience, although the prison guards would look at them with scrutiny and play. It was also a rare opportunity for female prisoners to show themselves. During the competition, they would do catwalks and talent shows, some singing, some dancing. Although the performances were not professional, everyone was fully engaged. There were different awards in this competition, such as the Best Costume Award and the Most Beautiful Smile Award. Female inmates who received awards could receive small prizes such as shampoo and small mirrors that might seem insignificant on the outside, but were invaluable in prison. Fifth, infamous Ravensbrück concentration camp. It is located in Germany. It was a concentration camp established by Nazi Germany to hold mainly women. From 1939 to 1945, it was like a giant human meat grinder. More than 130,000 women were mercilessly sent in, and about 50,000 women died here. In the Ravensbrück concentration camp, female prisoners were forced to participate in endless productive labor, waking up before dawn and working hard until late at night in harsh conditions. From the first glimmer of light in the early morning to the deep night, they could only repeat the movements of their hands mechanically in the dim light, and they suffered great physical and mental torture, and what they produced would be sent to the Nazi soldiers on the front line. They were squeezed into damp and dark camps, cramped to the point of inactivity, with poor sanitation and rapid disease spreading. Even so, the Nazi guards would from time to time brutally beat, torture, and humiliate them. Even more outrageous is the fact that some female prisoners were forced to participate in brutal medical experiments, such as sterilization, and these experiments were carried out without any anesthesia. Those innocent female prisoners struggled and screamed in pain on the operating table, but no one took pity on them. Their human rights were completely trampled on, and their dignity was crushed. The musician Katharina Hardy was a survivor of the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she spent 2 months before being sent to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Katharina Hardy said that in the concentration camps, there were deaths every day, corpses on the ground, constant gunshots, and only being alive was an exception. When British soldiers liberated the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp on April 15, 1945, she was curled up on the ground. Her legs were bent, unable to stand up, and her legs were unable to be straightened. She couldn't swallow, she couldn't eat, and she weighed only 29 kilograms, like a skeleton. It can be said that the Ravensbrück concentration camp was not only a prison, but also an ironclad proof of Nazi atrocities. It is the darkest page in human history. Here, life was trampled on wantonly, and the ugliness of human nature was vividly displayed. Fourth, La Esperanza Women's Holistic Penitentiary System in Nicaragua. Since mid-January 2024, female prisoners here have been deprived of time outdoors, whereas previously they were allowed to go out once a week. Other female prisoners were reportedly beaten during interrogation, getting bruises on their arms and legs. La Esperanza is overcrowded, with bunk beds and cells that can accommodate up to 75 prisoners. It lacks drinking water, beds, medicine, or medical care. Because of the large number of prisoners, many were held in very small cells, where they were forced to release themselves in place in the cells, and there were no cleaning tools in the bathroom. The lights in the cells were on 24 hours a day, which seriously affected the sleep of female prisoners. Even in such a poor environment, the interrogation took place once a day. No family members or lawyers were allowed to visit, and the family of the female prisoner did not even know where she was being held, and the whole person was semi-missing. Third, Lowell Prison in Florida, USA. It is one of the largest female correctional facilities in the United States, but has the highest mortality rate of any women's prison in the United States. Ordinary prisons have standardized management and security guarantees, and prison guards will enforce the law within reasonable limits. But at Lowell Prison, prison guards often used excessive force. They treated the female prisoners extremely harshly, and if they did not like it, they would fight the female prisoners. There was once a female prisoner who was found to have violated discipline by prison guards just because she had spoken a few more words to the people next to her, and she was beaten violently, which caused broken ribs. She had to stay in her bed for a long time. This act of violent law enforcement has filled the entire prison environment with hostility and fear. And female prisoners are afraid every day that they will be the next targets of violence. Even more frighteningly, the U.S. Department of Justice stated that an investigation found that prison staff at Lowell Correctional Facility sexually abused women. The report said that since at least 2006, the prison management has been aware of and documented staff's sexual abuse of Lowell inmates, but the prison has not taken action to address the issue. Prison staff would often touch female inmates' bodies or require inmates to undress in front of them in exchange for basic necessities such as toilet paper. They would even force inmates to engage in abusive sexual relations and monitor inmates as they bathed, went to the toilet, or changed their clothes. If these women wanted to report abuses by prison guards, they threatened them with solitary confinement. Lowell, the oldest women's prison in Florida, opened in 1956 and is the largest women's prison in the country, with at least a quarter of women sexually abused or harassed at the time of publication. Second, Bandy Up Women's Prison in West Swan, Australia. Bandy Up Women's Prison is located in the northeastern suburbs of Perth and was established in 1971. The prison, which was originally designed to accommodate only 68 inmates, is now severely overcrowded, with the actual number of inmates far exceeding that number and being overcrowded beyond imagination. Walking into Bandy Up Women's Prison is like stepping into a forgotten corner. Unlike ordinary prisons, which have well-equipped facilities, the living conditions of the inmates here are extremely poor. They were forced to sleep on floor mattresses and often even shared a bed, with no guarantee of even the most basic sleeping space. Shower facilities were severely lacking, and in many cases, female prisoners could only scrub in extremely rudimentary conditions, which was not enough to meet their daily cleaning needs. Medical care was even more ineffective, and it was difficult for sick female prisoners to receive timely and effective treatment. Telephone rooms were also severely inadequate, and female prisoners had few opportunities to communicate with the outside world, as if they were completely cut off from the world. The prison was unable to expand in size, so it had to keep adding beds, so that the upper bunk beds were so close to the ceiling that the female prisoners could not even sit upright on the beds, and the electric light on the roof was only 10 centimeters from the head of the bed. There were no tables and chairs in the cells for the female prisoners to sit down. What's even more terrifying is that here, even ordinary prisoners would be treated as felons. Their behavior was extremely restricted, and they were not allowed to hang around outside. In such an environment for a long time, the psychological problems of female prisoners were becoming more and more serious, and anxiety, depression, and other emotions enveloped the entire prison. First, Parapana Agrahara Central Prison. It is located in Bangalore, India, and it is the largest prison in Karnataka. The prison was designed to have a capacity of only 2,200 people, but the actual number of inmates was as high as 4,500. Here, 8 or 9 prisoners had to be crammed into a small room. The air was cloudy and filled with a disgusting smell. The dilapidated walls were stained, and the floor was damp and dirty. There was rubbish and debris everywhere, and there was nowhere to put the feet. The sanitary conditions in the prisons were simply deplorable, and the sanitation facilities were far from adequate due to the overcrowding. Toilets were often clogged, sewage was overflowing, and washing areas were crowded and chaotic, making it a luxury for female prisoners to maintain basic cleanliness. In terms of basic necessities, it was also extremely scarce. The food supply was not only small, but also of very poor quality, and the female prisoners barely survived on the hard-to-swallow food every day. Drinking water was also often scarce, and sometimes only turbid, yellow, and odorous water could be drunk. Clothing and household items were even more scarce, and many female prisoners could only wear shabby clothes and shiver in the cold night. Even pregnant women and children were not spared such horrific living conditions, and for some reason, more than 20 pregnant women and 7 children under the age of 6 were being held in this prison. They were forced to squeeze into a small cell where they slept on the floor with only 2 sheets and a pillow, and the food was the same every day. It was only after 8 months of pregnancy that they could be transferred to the hospital. There was a female prisoner named Shaya who had not been able to recuperate for a long time. She fainted when she was 7 months pregnant and gave birth to a premature baby girl weighing less than 1 pound. What is even more outrageous is that there were only 2 toilets in each cell, and there was only cold water for bathing. Of course, in addition to environmental problems, female prisoners also faced aggression by prison guards almost every day here. When the police had just arrested someone, the prison guards would know that a group of young and beautiful little girls were going to come in today, and the ownership of these women had been divided at that time. Well, if it were you, would you be able to get out of such a prison alive?